Welcome back to Geek Warning, the podcast that puts the world's most interesting cycling tech into one place. I'm Dave Rome, and joining me this week, Brad Copeland. Welcome back.
It's good to be here, Dave. This is always the highlight of my week.
Amazing. Brad, anything in the work stand this week that got you a little giddy?
Well, one thing that is maybe the most notable is something we're going to talk about a little bit later in our little podcast here, Dave. So maybe we shouldn't spoil it.
Yeah,
it's a new bike.
Okay.
It's not the fanciest of new bikes, but I think it's a compelling new bike. So
we've got a few affordable new bikes to talk about, which is pretty awesome. So for once. But yeah, before we get into the episode, which does include a few new bikes, some high-end road and some more affordable gravelly things. We've also got something that's on my mind. We've got, of course, a PSA. Before we jump into all that, I'd like to thank all of those that did complete the listener survey data or provided us data for the listener survey. We've read through a lot of the comments, taken on board a lot of the feedback, so thank you to everyone that did fill that out. Some of it was not the easiest things to read, but yeah, thankfully we've been able to pull some, useful and common themes out of all of that, and hopefully make this podcast better as a result of it. So, but that said, I guess I did want to just mention that we won't always be able to please everyone. Some of you asked specifically for less mountain bike content. Others wanted more mountain bike content, and it was kind of an even split between that. And yeah, I guess indeed, like Escape Collective is predominantly a road website at this time, but at Geek Warning, we've always tried to cover tech from a broad spectrum of cycling. So, because all bikes are rad, and I think why someone that only cares about road cycling should probably keep listening when we do talk about mountain bikes is that often the tech involved trickles down, trickles across, is shared. So yeah, I guess specifically if you look at the road bikes being raced today, all of the common themes of tech, all the major tech elements on a modern road bike pretty much were done and dialed in mountain bike over a decade ago. So disc brakes, tubeless, wider tires, wider gearing.
Yeah, I was going to say the gear ratios alone are unbelievably broader and sort of more usable than they were even 20 years ago on road bikes when I was starting my road side of my racing. If you ran anything larger than like a 23 tooth, and if you weren't on a standard chainring 3953, then you were soft. So by those standards, we're all soft now. So, and I'm here for it because it's a whole lot easier to ride these bikes these days. So, but yeah, you're right. 15, 20 years from now, whatever's happening currently in the mountain bike world is most likely going to be featured on your road bike then. So stay tuned anyway.
Or elements of it. So yeah, I guess we'll keep talking about it, but I guess where possible, we'll try explain why it might be relevant to someone that doesn't ride mountain bikes. And yeah, I guess, as far as the themes we discuss, we're still going to focus more on the Lycra end of things. So we're not going too far off the deep end. We won't discuss the latest downhill bikes unless they've got interesting trends. But don't expect us to tell you about the latest, 7-inch travel free ride mountain bike because it's a little out of the scope of this podcast. Before we get going, some of the feedback did mention that they, sad to hear James go, and I guess it's worth reiterating that he did leave as his own choice. But along those lines, we also miss him, and he's out enjoying some well-earned time off after decades of doing bike stuff. So big news from the past week since we record the last podcast is Canyon have officially released their new Aeroad road bike. We knew this one was coming. We'd seen it out there. I mean, heck, even a F1 driver had been spotted on TV with one. So, but yeah, it's now official. And I guess, some real basics of it. They've increased the tire clearance. It now fits 32s. They've made it a little less funky, as in there's no proprietary tool required to adjust the headset bearing tension. It's now a bolt. They've changed up the handlebar design a little bit, so the brake hoses now run externally through the removable hood section, through the removable drop section. So it's a little bit easier to build up. It also makes that handlebar a bit more modular, so you can choose your drop shape, whether you want flared or not. There's changes everywhere, but overall it looks similar to the old bike in terms of weight, stiffness, and aero. It's, there's improvements there, but nothing significant. It's all sort of iterative changes. But Brad, the big change that sort of piqued my interest is that they were aiming to make every bolt on the bike, barring through axles, I believe, but every bolt on the bike a T25 head interface. And they've apparently worked with a bolt supplier to create custom bolts that have a little bit more depth and better engagement to them than what, some other T25 fasteners on bikes typically offer. What do you think of this?
Well, I think it's a well-placed idea. In fact, years ago when I was involved with the Specialized factory racing team, that was one of my suggestions for the future, next edition of the Epic, was to use hardware that was all the same size, mostly because they all seem to be a different size from one another, and you would need 4 or 5, some torque, some Allen, to basically disassemble or reassemble the rear end of the bike. So there's definitely merit there. Yeah, I see no real reason to complain about it, as long as you have a trusty T25, which you will if you get this bike, because it's conveniently engineered one into the handle of the quick release kind of through axle, like little handle that kind of snaps into the head of it, and it has a little T25 on there, which I should just say we also had at Scott as well, on the mountain bike side as well, but the road bike would be able to accept it. And it was actually stepped, and it was like a T25, a 5 and a 6, like all on this little handle piece you could pull out of the axle and then use on your bike. And so, anyway, yeah, great. I'm glad they are. And I'm glad they used quality bolts too, Dave. That's more to the point, whether it's the same size or not. I think that the fact that they didn't cheap out and cut corners on hardware, evidently, is something that should be applauded no matter what size the head is.
Yeah. I guess people that have had bad luck with T25 in the past, or Torx in the past, which is, to be clear, it's a star-shaped interface. So it's like a hex key, but star-shaped interface, and it's made to increase the points of engagement and surface area. So in theory, for a given fastener size, it allows more torque to be applied. But Brad, do you have any favorites as far as hand tools go for it?
I'm a PB Swiss aficionado. I have like a ratcheting T-handle that is a favorite of mine, that has like interchangeable bits, but a ratcheting handle and fits very ergonomically in the hand. So that's a lovely one. I also have the sort of corresponding PB Swiss Torx, the Digitorque torque tool. So those would be my two. And of course, then I have quite a collection of bits, also PB Swiss. So that they've always had, I feel like, kind of the best fit, or maybe not the best, but I mean, you could argue among a handful of top brands, but definitely some of the best fit and tolerances. So those are my go-to.
Yeah,
how about
no
you?
arguments. That's exactly what I use for Torx as well. And there is a threaded article dedicated to all things Torx and better times of Torx, and that's actually the title of the article. But it's, for me, it's basically PB Swiss or Vera, are the two that I recommend for Torx. And there's a lot of others that don't do a fantastic job as far as keeping your fasteners working. So it's.
I think. Sorry, I had to interrupt you. I think too that's kind of what makes or breaks a good Torx experience in the first place too. If you have like a shoddy fit, whether it's from a cheap bolt that's a Torx headed bolt or a low quality poor fitting tool, they tend to not actually engage very well, and under higher torque loads, it kind of slip out of the bolt head. Early disc brake adopters back in the 6-bolt mountain bike days have probably skinned every knuckle on their finger with installing those rotor bolts a million times over and over again. So eventually you get one that slips, or you slip, or your bolts get kind of ragged out, and you lose some of that tolerance. And then you can really be upset you were using a Torx tool. So that's where the high quality bolts really matter. That's where high quality tools really matter. And I think too, on a road bike in particular, where the torque values are low, where you don't need to be loading on the bolt, you also get a lower, I should say you get a better torque reading if you're using a torque wrench, which hopefully you are. Typically you get more accurate torque reading because of the better tool to bolt interface and the reading that the tool takes from that interface, essentially. So good reasons to have nice tools and nice bolts too.
Yep. PB Swiss, my personal places that I buy from, DRPD in the US, and a place called Werk 10, WERK 10, out of Germany, I believe they are, and that's another place in Europe, and they're very well priced, often more limited range. But yeah, anyone shopping for PB Swiss, avoid Amazon. They tend to be very expensive on there. So anyway, little tech tip. But Brad, keeping with the Canyon for a little bit longer, the previous Aeroad had some pretty significant issues. There was a handlebar issue that led to a stop ride notice, which left owners or early adopters of that bike basically sitting with a bike they weren't allowed to ride for months while Canyon came up with a solution. There was also some issues with the seat post, I believe. I'm sure Canyon have fixed all of this now. Does a brand deserve a pass when they come out with a new model and it fixes all the issues that people had previously bought into?
Well, it's hard to forget some things, but if they have in fact resolved the issues successfully, then we have to take it on face value. I think I definitely have had some curious experiences with Canyons, both the Aeroad and some other ones as well, and some of their unique designs, whether it's seat posts, over engineering, I would say, or just strange engineering. I don't know if it's over or under or what, but the handlebar issue was obviously a big one that was compounded by the failure to address it in a timely fashion, I think. So, I'm not 100%, and I've actually seen this new handlebar. We installed one not long ago in my shop, and I am slightly terrified of the concept of it. I'm sure it's safe. I know they have to test it.
Where the drops bolt into the center handlebar, which is kind of like this elongated stem.
Yeah, it's like a T-shaped stem that has like some stubby extensions where then the tops and drops, it's like a separate piece entirely. There appeared to be some adjustment there to accommodate different width preferences. And obviously there's a flared drop. Like Dave said, they refer to the Aeroad drop in their literature, but it's kind of more flared and tucked hood position that's slightly longer reach, I think, too. And so the idea of having a part of the bike that you really rely a lot on for safety and everything else as a direct point of contact between you and your bike, that's an awfully, I don't know, unusual or suspicious design just in my...
Complicated.
Yeah, it's a little complicated. I mean, it doesn't route the hose through it. So like, I think a lot of Canyon's designs are meant to be easy to accomplish whatever task you're attempting to accomplish, whether it's assembling it new from the factory out of the box or changing something. A lot of these designs allow you to do it without having to do very complicated work, such as hydraulic work. And since that requires particular tools that many people will not have, they've designed a bar that allows you to swap stuff around relatively easily without having to open a hydraulic system and deal with all of that, which I think sort of
unless you need to change stem length.
Yes, exactly. And so, but it does allow for some usability improvement in a way, but I am a little bit miffed on the concept because I would have a hard time feeling confident in that personally.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say, yeah, I mean, it goes back to a point we made a few episodes ago, which is whenever you're an early adopter of something, there's risk in that. You know, if you're the first to buy something, I think to buy something new, I think there is inherent risk in doing that. And yeah, I think unfortunately people that bought into the previous Aeroad discovered that risk, and it perhaps wasn't handled as well as it could have been. And I mean, Canyon did try. I think they gave some credit to people, and you know, there was certainly a monetary apology associated with that bike. But for a lot of people that had just spent, you know, their savings on a bike that was their only road bike, I mean, it kind of sucks then being told you can't ride it. So yeah, I think anyway, yeah, I think this new bike looks good. I'm sure it rides well. It does look to fix a lot of the complaints previously mentioned with the old bike and previously experienced with the old bike. But I think for a lot of people and anyone that bought that previous Aeroad, I think it's understandable why they might be looking for another brand at this point. So anyway, good luck to Canyon. I think it seems like a good thing, and I think they have made some good improvements. So
time will tell.
And I like the trend of one tool to do everything on a bike. So kudos to them on that. Brad, should we talk about some new well-priced bikes that are confusing category definitions?
Yes.
And without to stop being cryptic, we've got two new bikes, one from Otso Cycles, one from State. These are both brands based in America, both claiming to have new all-road bikes, which have incredibly wide tire clearance that clearly makes them gravel bikes. Do we want to talk about all-road versus gravel first, or do we want to talk about the bikes first?
Well, let's talk about all-road versus gravel first. I mean, maybe this is the term that should have been used all along, because let's face it, many gravel rides don't stick exclusively to gravel, and sometimes it's dirt. It's not even gravel. So perhaps before it's too late and we get too far down the gravel road, we have to consider whether that's the appropriate term. As you said, both of these bikes feature what we've sort of identified in previous episodes of this podcast, Dave, as kind of the new standard for tire minimum clearance at about 50 millimeters to be a viable current gravel option. Both of these bikes, well, in fact, I think the State, it exceeds by a few millimeters that 50 millimeter clearance mark. And then, of course, the Otso claims 50 millimeters. It also claims to accept 650 by 50 millimeter tire as well. So it's bragging about all types of versatility.
Let's stick to
let's dive in.
the all road thing.
Yes.
So I guess, yeah, for people that aren't aware, like all road currently for the last few years has been used by the bike industry to describe a bike that fits somewhere between a road bike and a gravel bike. And it's basically a alternative term than from what the industry used to call an endurance road bike, because endurance road stopped being cool, apparently. And so they just started calling it all road, which confused people to no sense, because people that wanted a road bike with more attainable geometry were like, hang on, now you're trying to sell me a gravel bike? So yeah, it is a confused term. And I think it seems like some of these brands are trying to take it back and just call their versatile gravel bike an all-road bike. And I like it, but I also think it's a little bit confusing. Because as we'll get to, I mean, that State comes stock with 47 millimeter tires and has room for wider. I mean, that's not what I would consider a bike made for all roads. It's a bike made for off-road. So yeah. Anyway, I don't think we're going to come to a conclusion on that, but I would like the industry to get more consistent with defining all road and perhaps, you know, explaining what that is versus a gravel bike. And Brad, as you say, maybe all gravel bikes should be all road bikes. But yeah, I don't know. I think we're just confusing people at this point.
It might just be one of those things like in the early days of mountain bikes and sort of pseudo mountain bike hybrids, where the term ATB was coined and the all-terrain bicycle was then ultimately replaced by the mountain bike, there was a gray area or a period of a few years where the terms themselves weren't well established. And so maybe gravel in its relative infancy, I mean, we're 10 years in now, I guess. So it's certainly maturing quickly these days. But I would say with the evolution of subcategories of gravel, I think it might be nice to have at least some reference points that are fairly consistent. So we'll see. We'll see industry. We'll see.
Yeah, so I guess the advice there, and for people listening to this podcast who hopefully have enough of a technical mind to understand and look at a geometry chart, I think given that some brands are misusing the terms or confusing the terms, I think if you're shopping for a new gravel bike, perhaps don't rule out bikes that have the all-road definition, and look to the tire clearance and look to the geometry to decide whether it's right for you. But all right, so these new bikes. Brad, I think this is the bike you've built this week, which is the new Otso Cycles Warakin Steel. And I guess, so Otso Cycles, it's the sibling company to Wolftooth Components. It's their bike company. And the Warakin is a bike that is currently or previously available in titanium and stainless steel. And now they've added a chromoly steel version, which is better priced, lower priced. I mean, what is this thing, and what did you think of it?
So we've gotten I think 4 of them delivered. I built one yesterday and one today. In fact, ours are like stock versions, which I believe the retail is in the neighborhood of $2,500 US. It's for a complete bike. Yeah. So it's very well priced. I would not say it does anything that is industry changing or mind blowing, but as we have talked about lately, Dave, sometimes that's not what people really always want, No. So maybe this is great, actually. Maybe you don't need a mind blowing new model. And what's lovely, I would say about this bike is that everything is externally routed, which we have been applauding recently. These are a 1x-group GRX 800 spec, so very solid spec. So 4130 chromoly frame is basically like a butted steel frame that's pretty, I don't want to say generic, but it's not like anything with great complexity or frills. It's got an interesting flip chip compatibility, or like a wheel versatility compatibility. So if you want to run wide tires, narrow tires, 650B wheels, single speed, you can essentially replace or reverse an alloy kind of element within the dropout at the rear end of the bike that allows you to scoot forward or backwards. I think it's 20 millimeters of wheelbase adjustability, so substantial. It also adjusts somewhat inevitably the BB height and the head tube angle a little bit when you make those adjustments too. So, but it's
you know what it doesn't allow?
What's that?
A UDH.
Oh, I was going to say, I know that was my one note that I made. I was going to have to tie that into the make or break feature for all new release gravel bikes here and into the future, which we just declared about 3 weeks ago to be the presence of a UDH hanger to accommodate
it does seem like
new groups.
Yeah, so we've seen it with the new Giants Revolts Advanced, and we've seen it now with Wolftooth and a few other brands here. But it does seem like there's a incompatibility, or current incompatibility. I mean, no one's worked it out yet, between a bike with like an adjustable chainstay and having a UDH. It seems like you can have one or the other. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure someone will work it out. And there are exceptions to that, like the Paragon Machine Works, who make a lot of dropouts for a lot of the handmade scene, and Curve Cycling have their own version of this as well, where you can have like this modular bolt-on dropout that slides in the frame, and that can have a UDH. But yeah, having like more Otso Cycles version, which is like this sliding dropout built straight into the frame, that does seem to be incompatible with UDH. So something to keep in mind for people looking for this feature.
Yeah, I was sort of wondering when I was looking at the bike too, and that dropout assembly, and they offer a few different dropout options if you wanted to be either in the middle of the two positions you can achieve with the flip chip. There's a third chip that is not flippable, I would say, which finds the sort of midpoint of those two options. And there's a single speed option. So my curiosity would be if there's any conceivable way that a fifth, whatever, another option that could accommodate a UDH. It seems impossible. But for me, that was the one miss of this bike that I wanted to report. Unfortunately, I have to tell you, Otso, sorry, you didn't get our memo. You should have tuned into the podcast.
Dare I say they had this bike made before that episode? But
I'm sure they did, but still.
I'm sure they did. Yeah. So yeah, I guess generally speaking, this bike, like they call it an all-road bike, but really it's more like something that we've probably seen from like the likes of Surly before, where it's kind of just a do-it-all bike. Like you can kind of build it up to be anything. It's, it's a suspension-corrected geometry. It's got clearance of up to 50 tires. It's, as Brad just said, it's all the adjustments in the back. So yeah, it's kind of this do-it-all model rather than a all-road bike. And as Brad said, I think it's pretty cool. It's the sort of bike that you can get and just make your own.
And it's
not for everyone, but also for everyone.
It's for everyone. It can do many things. It has a lot of bolts and holes where you can mount all types of accessories to it and go bike packing if that's your thing, or racks or whatever you want to do. Fenders, it's all there. Carbon fork comes with, so it's like decent spec. Kind of checks a lot of the important boxes. But it's very affordable. Yeah, so it's pretty cool. Like the paint finish quality is good, graphics are good. So I predict that our shop will sell a lot of these bikes. It's a kind of bread and butter type of bike for us. So I think it's a good one.
Probably worth noting that the shop that you're at, you're on the tools rather than on the sales floor, and
I am.
I think.
Yeah. I am. Yeah.
So not working on commission by giving this plug.
No, I'm not. And but nevertheless, I think it's another bike we have in that category that we've actually been struggling to get lately. They've been sold out as a specialized alloy, Diverge, and even the new Crux. We've been unable to get some of those models in that sort of price point realm, and so. And then of course this is a steel option. So some people like that, and it is a little bit heavy, but so be it. And it's a pretty tough, pretty cheap,
robust.
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah,
good job.
All right. Speaking of another cheap all-road style, confusingly gravel bike, State, which is an American brand. Very much a budget-oriented brand. They consumer direct. They really push down price points. The last time I rode one, I ended up I tested it in Steamboat Springs for the old place, and it hurt me. I drew blood. So truthfully, my first and only experience with the brand wasn't super positive. The brakes didn't work very well on it. The tubeless wheels leaked out of the seams of the rims. It was a frustrating experience, but still hard to argue with the amount they were charging for it. It was a lot of features and a lot of bike for a very low price. And on that theme, State now have a titanium all-road bike. Titanium bike, complete bike, $2,500 US. I mean, that's all I can probably say at this time. I haven't ridden one. I have no reason, I have no authority to say whether it'll last or not. Dare I say that, you probably are getting what you pay for, and don't expect this to be as nice as a Lightspeed or something like that. But for $1,300 for a titanium frame, or $2,500 for a complete bike, I mean, there's a lot there.
I had to check and make sure I was understanding it all correctly when I was reading some of those numbers. I also had to make sure it was the same state, since you are, as an Australian person, sometimes enjoy some brands that we don't see here in the United States. I had to make sure it was the same state that I thought it must be, but was sort of shocked to find out that it was in fact and they were offering a titanium bike, which up to now they were pretty like low level, like beater steel bikes. Really, I mean, it's how I would describe State essentially.
Nothing. Yeah, they dabbled in a bit higher end stuff, or a bit more like enthusiast stuff, which is the sort of bike I tested previously. But yeah, for the most part, they're more city style, budget bikes. Yeah.
So this was a bit of a kind of came out of left field, as we say over here on our soil. I don't know. You play cricket probably down there, so left field doesn't mean much to you, but anyway,
it does.
You can
we
extrapolate.
Fields.
Okay,
sure.
Cool. Good.
Yeah. So State, they, obviously this bike is manufactured in China, but they do their assembly in the US, which means they can kind of build to order. So you can adjust the build kit on it. They've even got a bike with SRAM wireless shifting, which I believe is rival level. It might be Apex, and Envy carbon wheels, which would be the lower, more entry level Envy. But yeah, complete bike at $4,400 for a titanium bike with all the brands. Yeah, so I don't know. It's interesting. I'll give them that. It'll be interesting to see how it rides, and I think bigger picture with it, I do worry how this will hurt the feelings of the more traditional brands that their bread and butter are titanium bikes that are significantly more expensive than this, and often for good reason. So,
right.
Yeah, we'll see.
Well, it begs a question, Dave, one you posed earlier today, which is, do they deserve a free pass, a second chance, having burned you once and drawn blood in Steamboat Springs, Colorado? Do they deserve even this mention on the podcast, let alone a second chance from you in life?
I'm separated by an ocean from being able to purchase one of these, so I'm not the customer for it. But if I were in the US and I had access to a test bike of these, I would give them a second chance, because the blood was drawn based off of brakes that didn't work, and I think having a brand name brake now would solve for that. And hopefully we wouldn't have to take lint out of the dryer in order to seal the tubeless rim the second time around. So yeah, James and I remember were in a lack of sleep fueled hysteria over that, as we're running around looking for things to stick in the wheel in the hope that it would finally let us seat this tubeless tire. So the memory stands. Well, did it work? The dryer lint. This reminds us of maybe a future treat. It works an absolute treat. Yeah, cool. I was going to say this might feature in more elaboration in a future discussion of ghetto fixes on the side of the road or in the garages of the back alleys of the world where we find ourselves, Dave. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, so there you go. One very high-end carbon race bike and two bikes that are gravel bikes but are called all-road bikes, and now I'm as confused as everyone else over what the categories mean. Brad, I've got something on my mind this week, which is that reviewing bikes as a job is expensive, or it can be expensive. Yeah, I bet a lot of folks think you really have this cushy gig where you just get all this new stuff to ride and test it out, you and Ronan, on all these fancy new bikes all the time. But it's not quite so straightforward as that. It's not always. So, yeah, I mean, they certainly, in the job, I certainly do have people reach out through my inbox and like, hey, we've got this fancy new bike coming out in a few months. Would you like to test it? We'll send you one. It's like, that sounds great. I would like to test it. And I think people would be interested in hearing what it's like. So I get this fancy bike in. I ride it. Sometimes it's underwhelming. Sometimes I'm not the customer for it, and I'm happy to put it back in its box. But occasionally, I get to test a bike where I'm like, damn, this is in every way better than the bike I own. It's better than my own bike. And at that point, you finish up the review and they go, cool, can you send it back to us? And at that point, you've now got the experience where your own bike is not as good as it used to be. And that happened to me. I've just wrapped up my review of the Santa Cruz Stigmata. It's their new gravel bike. And dare I say, that bike impressed me so much that I've had to buy a new bike. So, yeah, it's... I've had an expensive week, but it's a reminder that there's inherent cost in someone giving you the latest and greatest to test, and then you have the comparison point and you realize that your own stuff is not as good as it once were.
Tempted by the fruit of another. So with that though, Dave, so you've purchased for yourself a new Stigmata. Yeah, presumably, and so then that serves basically as the backbone, or is sort of like the baseline metric, and then you adorn it with all the other bits and bobs that come your way throughout the year, and you do your testing based on a platform that's relatively the same otherwise. Is that fair to say?
Pretty much. It kind of then becomes like your benchmark bike for a comparison point, and then it also it does become the test bed. So for me, Santa Cruz Stigmata is replacing a bike of my own, which is a 51 Assassin, which funnily enough was also another model that I tested back at the old place. Liked it, wasn't like completely in love with it, but liked it enough and was curious enough that a few months later, after sending back that test bike, I ended up buying a frame set from them. And that has served me well and is a fantastic bike, but I guess the Santa Cruz is just that little bit better in ways that matter to me, that I couldn't help but lose more money. So, so I guess I'm just foolish, because that 51 is a beautiful bike, but it's, I'm different, I guess, in that regard, because there are a lot of tech editors who'll get long-term review bikes and they'll hold on to a bike for a year from the brand, and that will be their testbed bike. Being in Australia, it's actually rarer for the local industry to want to lend you a bike for that period of time. They kind of want to move them on into the demo fleet or sell it to a staff member or something like that. So for me, I typically own my own bike. So I own my own bikes in every category that I test in. And that's handy in having a bike to fall back on and not feel like you're forever jumping between bikes and
maybe
logistically juggling.
And it might allow us all to trust you that much more too, knowing that you're personally invested and not just a talking head, just a parrot for these brands, a puppet. But in fact, you're actually riding a bike that you yourself had an emotional response to and purchased straight up.
Or maybe I'm just really bad with money.
Well, we've seen your tool collection, Dave, so we know that's true. One or the other.
Yeah. That is true. Yeah. So anyway, probably by the time you're reading this, I'd say that Santa Cruz review should be live. I spent far too many months thinking about that review. I think I did a good job on it. I tested it with both a suspension fork and a rigid fork. Spoiler alert, clearly I liked it. So it's, not the bike for everyone, but it's a gravel bike for a lot of people. Or is it an all-road bike?
All-road bike, Dave. Yes.
It's an all-road bike.
Yes.
I'm going to say this one's a gravel bike.
Yeah.
So, it's very cool. And I think as far as anyone in the gravel bike market, I'd say check out that review, because there's a lot of features on that bike that I would consider to be like probably the benchmark moving forward from now for the type of features and type of elements you should be looking for in a gravel bike. It really is a modern example of where things are headed, and it's kind of why I've ended up settling on one. So, what's on my mind is my bank balance, Brad.
Mind on your money and your money on your mind, Dave. I tell you, it's tough. But I mean, when I see every morning I wake up and your Instagram feed is just a new shipment of tools from Japan or wherever they come. I mean, I have a hard time feeling sympathy, because you've brought this all on yourself, and you have only yourself to blame.
But it occurred to me yesterday that I definitely have a problem, and I was going to put this on Twitter, but I don't use Twitter, so I just had to keep it in my mind. But it occurred to me yesterday that a courier van pulled up into the street, and my dog went and waited by the front door. The van wasn't even for me. It was just, but my dog is that conditioned to having that many courier vans come by, that he's like, oh, this is for us. I think that's probably a good case a good example of maybe I need to cool it a little bit.
Yes, I think our dogs may know us better than we know ourselves, Dave. So take your cues.
Yeah. All right. Let's take a short break. Back in a sec. Brad, let's do a PSA. What do you got?
Well, Dave, you and I think, bounce these PSAs, which usually start as gripes, personal gripes of our own, that we like to help other people avoid. I think that's generally the premise behind most of these things. And today's PSA is a reminder to clean and or service the freehub body in your rear hub of your rear wheel. It's often overlooked, sometimes challenging to access, sometimes very easy to access. And depending on your wheel, your hub, the brand that it is, it may, well, it in fact definitely will have unique or specific service requirements, which may involve some unique and specific greases or lubricants. But it's something that should be done relatively regularly, and when neglected can often lead to shockingly horrific and or expensive repairs or replacements, typically, which can often then involve more than just the freehub body if left too long. Usually it involves at least a few bearings, sometimes the axle, sometimes the whole hub itself.
Which then means a wheel rebuild, which often means new spokes as well. And then,
And sometimes it turns into an opportunity to upgrade your whole wheel set because it's so much to do that it's...
and before you know it, you've got a new bike.
So if that doesn't sound great to you, which it may, this would be a good time to maybe think about when the last time it was that your freehub saw service. If you can't remember, drop what you're doing, get your bike to the shop immediately. That's the PSA. We have some funny examples, don't we, Dave, of some freehub body carnage. Do you have some? I have some. I have a never-ending list.
I mean, I guess my main point, like my main thought with this PSA is that it's a part that sits underneath the cassette. So anyone that degreases their drivetrain and doesn't take the wheel out to do so is basically running degreaser through this pretty critical component of the bike, and it does see some stuff. And in my experience, as you said, Brad, it's neglected. And in my experience, like a lot of services, if you take your bike in for like a general service, it varies from shop to shop, but more often than not, I'd say shops aren't opening this up in as part of a general service. It's more like that next level of service where this component would be serviced. And in my personal preference, I guess, my opinion, I think the sort of wear and ingress of dirt freehub C it's the sort of part that I would like to see serviced every time a bike is serviced. Any time a bike gets its brakes bled, or its bottom bracket checked, or its gears and brakes tuned, for a higher end bike, I think it makes sense to open this up and clean the dirt out and just put a tiny bit of fresh grease in there. So, but back to your question. Funny things that I've seen with freehubs. I mean, it's the usual. It's basically the stuff you said, where it's like, there's enough dirt in there that the poles or the freehub mechanism stop working, and then the hub locks up, or starts digging into the axle.
Yeah, exactly. It's and like, so the freehub body is basically what allows the wheel to coast or not when you're pedaling or not, and so it's a critical part because it's literally where the transfer of your power is turned into forward motion, and so it's under a lot of load. It's sort of an asymmetric load. It has to be drag free enough that when you coast, it doesn't slow you down. So although it is sealed against the elements, it's not usually sealed very well, because to seal things very well requires contact between a seal and a surface, which creates drag. And so on fancier bikes, race bikes, usually the least drag is the goal. And so a lot of companies, bearings, freehub body designs, et cetera, use low contact seals to achieve low drag, and that allows water, degreaser in there, as well as dirt and anything dissolved or kind of suspended within the water or degreaser. And so it allows little particles to kind of invade and degrade the contacting surfaces. at the very least. And you'll often, when I'm servicing a bike, I'll pull the freehub body off and find a lot of standing water in there, which can happen just from condensation. It can happen from bike washing, rain, anything like that. But it gets in there and it doesn't come out easily. So, depending on the freehub that you have, the wheel that you have, and the materials that are used, that water can oftentimes cause little things like the springs or the pawls themselves, which are usually steel, to corrode and rust. And when they rust, they become rough in texture. And when they move around inside with a rough texture and an alloy, environment, it typically is the harder material that lasts and the softer one that wears away. And so you get some loose fitting pawls sometimes that behave like a worn drivetrain where it feels like you're skipping teeth, but it's actually the pawls that are not fully engaging with the mechanism inside. And so you get some really curious symptoms that are sometimes hard to pinpoint. They behave like a really worn out drivetrain sometimes, or they make just horrendous sounds that are hard to sometimes figure out unless you know the history of the bike, and it's, the fact that it hasn't ever seen a service. And so that's all the reason why you should get it serviced regularly, so you never experience these hardships.
Yeah. But yeah, unfortunately, it's something you already said, which is there's a lot of variance in designs, and some are very easy to service. Some DT Swiss, for example, and a number of the latest hubs coming to the market, which no longer infringe on a current patent because DT Swiss's patent did expire. So there's a lot of hubs now that do offer this. But so some hubs, DT Swiss style, you can literally, with the cassette on, just pull out on it, and the whole free hub body will come out. Just watch for the little bits that come with it. And that gives you access directly inside. Others require tools to get in. Some, will have Allen key access. Others will need like a cone wrench, which is like a thin spanner. And there isn't any hard and fast rule over what design exists. Like, there are a myriad of different ways to get into these freehub bodies. Some are better than others. Some require like almost full hub disassembly in order to access them. And some, for many years, like Shimano style freehub bodies, actually cartridge style, where you're not technically able to service them. It is in theory possible, but it's pretty advanced and not manufacturer recommended. So I would say with all of this, if you're really unsure, either have your local shop do it, or if you're really keen to do it yourself, then find what hub your bicycle has, which in itself is not always the easiest thing. But yeah, try find what hub exists on your bike and find a manual associated with that and have a look. If it's a big name, brand name hub, then you'll easily be able to find step-by-step instructions. If it's a more generic hub, like a Formula or something like that has a specialized branding on it, or a Trek branding on it, or something along those lines, and it potentially is a bit more difficult to figure out what that hub is and how to service it. But either way, it's worth looking into. It's worth doing.
Free hubs ain't free. Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah, thank you. I just came up with that. Cool. That would be Free Hubs 101, but get in there quick, because I had a recent zip wheel in the shop, relatively new Zip 303 that came in. The customer was pretty meticulous about cleaning his bike, but he's gone through 2 free hubs, which have corroded and just like rusted basically, and you sort of pull it apart and it's like a paste of grease and rust just coating everything inside, and has and nothing to do but replace the axle and the free hub both times. And he's like, well, I clean it all the time, what should I do? And for me, if I see something that's recurring, even if you do clean it, you got to change the way you clean it, because if you're getting water in and the water is the problem, then maybe you have to do sort of like some degreaser on a rag and floss your cassette out and not really spray anything there, because it seems like a design that is quite easy to allow the ingress of water. And if that's inevitable, then sometimes you just have to live with your choices and service accordingly.
Yeah, so I'm a huge proponent for using what they call a dummy hub, which is you remove say you've got your bike in a work stand, you're about to degrease the chain. A dummy hub, you take the rear wheel out, and dummy hub takes the place of the hub, and it lets you still turn the cranks and move the chain, but it's just a hub replacement. And I'm a big proponent of that, purely for the reason that it removes the rear hub out of the line of being covered in degreaser and then hosed off. So it's basically all about saving the freehub body and not getting degreaser in between that seal. So dummy hubs are pretty cheap. You can make them yourself. There's endless YouTube videos on how to DIY such a thing, but even the professional versions are $15, $20. So yeah, they are a really useful tool, and expect the next edition of Threaded to cover that kind of tool, because it's definitely top of mind. And yeah, save the freehub buddies. It's think of the seals. All right, Brad, before we wrap up, I've got one quick little tech bite, which is that Kask have finally unveiled, it's now official, the Nirvana, which is the Aeroad helmet we first saw at Tour Down Under, which I think is probably most simply explained as the helmet you tuck your ears into. And yes, I mean, if you've seen the Kask helmet where they tuck their ears in, used by Ineos, that's now the Nirvana, and it comes with some pretty remarkable claims. 35% reduction in aerodynamic drag and 19% increase in ventilation compared to the best aero helmets in its class. I'm going to say no, but also it looks like a good helmet.
It's a bad day if you're an ear to find out just how much of a performance hindrance you are. But otherwise, I mean, cool helmet. Is it the helmet or is it the ear? I think it might have to do with the ear.
Yeah. Anyway, for anyone, yeah, that has been keen on that helmet, it's now available. So check it out. But yeah, I think that's a good chance to wrap up. Brad, should we do this again next week?
I don't see why not.
All right. Well, we'll be back. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. And as always, Geek Warning is brought to you by Escape Collective, which is a wholly member-funded business. We don't have any advertising. We don't have a website that's a hot mess of pop-ups to read. So yeah, if you like a website that just gives you the content, gives you great content, that isn't difficult to get through, and a podcast that you hopefully like to listen to, then please consider supporting it all. Head to escapecollective.com/join. Your membership really does make a difference. On that note, thank you.